The soft, polished glow of Crestwell Industries' lobby gleamed in the early morning light, casting a golden hue across the marble floors. Aaliyah Thompson took a deep breath as she stepped through the grand entrance. Feeling the cool air hit her face and steady her nerves, she wore the plain blue uniform of the cleaning staff, a color that almost seemed designed to blend into the background. Her ID badge hung at her side, her name printed in small, unassuming letters that most people wouldn't bother reading. With a mop in one hand and a bucket in the other, Aaliyah looked like any other janitor working the early shift. But she was anything but ordinary. Her gaze was sharp, her posture confident, and her every movement held a quiet determination. She took in her surroundings with careful precision, scanning the hallways, the reception desk, the waiting area, all symbols of Crestwell's corporate success and wealth. Today, she was here to start something that had been years in the making. To anyone else, Aaliyah was just another face among the dozens of employees who passed through Crestwell Industries daily. She was invisible, as were the other workers in maintenance, security, and housekeeping. She knew that most executives didn't even know the names of those who kept their pristine offices running smoothly. And that was precisely why she'd chosen this approach. Being overlooked gave her the freedom to move undetected, to observe, and to plan. As she walked to the janitor's closet to gather her supplies, her mind drifted back to her beginnings, to the journey that had brought her here. Aaliyah had grown up in a working-class neighborhood with her mother, Denise, and her 2 younger siblings. Her mother worked 2 jobs, cleaning houses in the mornings and taking on night shifts as a janitor. Denise was a woman of quiet strength, someone who faced the world's challenges with dignity and perseverance. She instilled those same values in her children, teaching them to be proud of who they were and to never let anyone make them feel small. From a young age, Aaliyah had learned that the world often didn't see people like her mother. Denise's clients rarely looked her in the eye, and her co-workers at the cleaning agency treated her as disposable, just another face that could be replaced without a second thought. But Aaliyah saw the strength in her mother, the sacrifices she made, and the determination that kept her moving forward even on the hardest days. Watching her mother's resilience, Aaliyah made a promise to herself. She would create a different future. She would find a way to control her destiny, to shape her own path, and to honor her mother's legacy in the process. With that resolve, Aaliyah worked tirelessly through high school, earning a scholarship to a prestigious university. She was often the only black woman in her business classes, a fact that didn't escape her attention. She'd grown used to the looks, the whispers, the way professors sometimes overlooked her when asking for input. But instead of letting it discourage her, she used it as fuel, pushing herself to excel. By the time she graduated with honors and completed her MBA, she had a plan. Aaliyah had learned how the world worked, how power moved, and who held it. She knew that in corporate America, real influence wasn't just about skill or hard work, it was about control. And the ultimate control was ownership. She saved every penny, took calculated risks in investments, and slowly, quietly, began acquiring shares of Crestwell Industries. It was a small company at first, but it grew quickly, and so did her influence. She kept her acquisitions under the radar, avoiding attention and scrutiny, until she reached a point where she held the majority stake. She had transformed herself from an outsider into the most powerful person in the room, without anyone even realizing it. As Aaliyah filled her bucket with water and grabbed a rag and spray bottle, she reminded herself of why she was here. This was the culmination of years of sacrifice, strategy, and sheer willpower. She had worked her way up the corporate ladder in secret, acquiring the power that others took for granted. But today was different. Today, she wasn't just here as a shareholder, she was here as a woman on a mission. Walking through the hallway, Aaliyah felt the weight of her position. She didn't want to change Crestwell from the top down, she wanted to understand it from the bottom up. She wanted to see the company as her mother would have seen it, through the eyes of those who were dismissed as the help. She wanted to experience, firsthand, the way people like her mother were treated. As she passed a group of executives in tailored suits, she felt their eyes slide past her, barely registering her presence. She overheard snippets of their conversation, profit margins, quarterly goals, An upcoming merger. Their words were heavy with self-importance, each phrase dripping with entitlement. One of them, a tall man with graying hair and a designer watch, glanced at her with brief disinterest before turning back to his colleagues. "We're cleaning house next quarter," he said with a chuckle. "Literally and figuratively, I'll be putting some pressure on the lower levels to tighten up their operations." Aaliyah's jaw tightened, but she kept her face neutral. Her gaze lowered. These were the people who believed themselves untouchable, who thought they could treat others as mere numbers on a spreadsheet. They had no idea who she was. And that suited her just fine. As she made her way to the executive floor, she passed two young receptionists whispering near the entrance to a conference room. "Did you see the new cleaning lady?" one of them asked. Casting a glance at Aaliyah. "I don't think I've seen her before." The other receptionist shrugged, her tone dismissive. "She'll probably be gone in a week. You know how the execs treat the cleaning staff, they're invisible." Invisible. Aaliyah felt a surge of anger mixed with a strange satisfaction. They had no idea that the invisible woman walking past them was the one who held their futures in her hands. As she pushed her cart into the hallway leading to the executive offices, she passed by the glass-walled boardroom where the company's leadership team was gathered. She could see them through the transparent walls. A group of men in crisp suits, laughing and talking with an air of unshakable confidence. At the head of the table sat Robert Griffin, the CEO of Crestwell Industries. His silver hair was impeccably groomed, and his tailored navy suit radiated authority. He was a man who had built his reputation on his vision and hard work. But Aaliyah knew the truth. She had studied him, learned his tactics, and seen how he wielded power. Robert Griffin was one of the reasons she had chosen Crestwell as her target. His arrogance had built an empire, but it was built on the backs of people like her mother. She paused outside the boardroom, pretending to clean a nearby window while listening in on their conversation. "So, gentlemen," Robert was saying, his tone smug, "we're set to close the merger by the end of the month. That means bonuses all around." The others laughed, raising their glasses in a mock toast. "Hard work pays off, doesn't it?" Robert said, casting a glance around the room, clearly pleased with himself. "More like smart work." James, the CFO, replied with a chuckle, "We know how to play the game." Richard, the head of marketing, leaned back in his chair, his smirk infuriatingly confident. "Smart work indeed. Not like that janitor downstairs. Imagine her looking at us in our suits, knowing this is as close as she'll ever get." Oliver, the operations manager, laughed. "Some people are just born to scrub floors and clean up after the rest of us. Life's not fair." Their laughter echoed through the hallway, loud and self-assured. To them, Aaliyah was nothing more than a faceless worker, an invisible part of the office scenery. They had no idea that the woman they were mocking was the one who now held the power to change their lives. Aaliyah's face remained calm, her hands steady on the spray bottle. But inside, she was filing away every word, every insult, every ounce of arrogance she encountered. These men believed they were the architects of Crestwell's success, that their brilliance alone had built this empire. But Aaliyah knew the truth. They had built it on the hard work and sacrifices of countless invisible workers. People like her mother who had never received a fraction of the recognition they deserved. Today, Aaliyah was here to take her rightful place, to begin her journey not as an outsider, but as someone who had risen to the top from the very bottom. The executives had no idea how much their world was about to change. As she continued down the hallway, she allowed herself a small, secretive smile. Today was the first step in a plan that would redefine Crestwell Industries. She would show them that power didn't belong only to those at the top. It could come from the ground up, from the very people they thought they could ignore. And as Aaliyah moved quietly, preparing herself for the transformation that lay ahead, she knew one thing for certain: her time to be invisible was over. The next morning, Aaliyah stepped into the lobby of Crestwell Industries with a new sense of purpose. She wore the same blue uniform, her ID badge clipped at her side. But something in her demeanor had shifted. She walked through the bustling corridors with her head held high, every step purposeful. Today, she was ready to take the first step toward real change. As she entered the janitor's closet, she could feel the weight of her secret. The power she held hidden beneath her unassuming exterior. She had watched, studied, and prepared for this moment for years. Now, she was ready to confront the system that had dismissed her. And she wasn't alone. In the background, allies were forming. Unbeknownst to her colleagues and superiors, Aaliyah had made connections with several junior staff members over the past few months. In the cafeteria, in the stairwell, and even in brief encounters in the hallways, she'd found people who were tired of being overlooked. People who shared her vision of a fair and just workplace. Quietly, subtly, she had built a network of like-minded employees, each of whom had their own grievances, their own stories of being disregarded and disrespected. One of her allies was Marcus, a young black man who worked in IT. He was skilled and ambitious, yet consistently passed over for promotions in favor of less qualified candidates. Aaliyah had noticed his frustration during one of their brief hallway conversations. "Don't let them get to you, Marcus," she'd said one day, recognizing the defeat in his eyes after yet another promising lead slipped through his fingers. "You have more power here than you think." Marcus had looked at her, surprised by the conviction in her voice. From that moment on, he'd become a quiet but loyal ally, helping her gain access to information and files that would prove invaluable. There was also Lily, a junior accountant who, like Aaliyah, had experienced the sting of being dismissed as just another worker. Lily was a single mother who worked tirelessly, but her efforts were barely acknowledged by the higher-ups. When Aaliyah approached her in the cafeteria one day, she could see the exhaustion in Lily's eyes, but also the faint glimmer of hope that someone was finally listening. "Why are you doing this?" Lily had asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "They'll never see us as equals." Aaliyah had smiled, a quiet but determined expression. "Then we'll make them see." With Marcus and Lily's help, Aaliyah began to piece together a plan that would send shockwaves through Crestwell. She wasn't aiming for revenge, she wanted systemic change. She wanted to create a workplace where every employee, no matter their role, felt valued and respected. But she knew that the only way to achieve this was to shake the foundation of the company itself. Aaliyah was mopping the floors on the executive floor when she noticed Robert Griffin, the CEO, walking toward her. His gaze swept over her without a hint of recognition. She was, as always, invisible to him, but today, she felt a surge of determination as she continued her work, aware that every minute she spent in the background was part of a larger strategy. Just as she was about to move, Robert stopped to check his phone. She took a deep breath, seizing the opportunity to engage him. "Good afternoon, Mr. Griffin," she said, keeping her voice polite and professional. Robert looked up, momentarily surprised that the cleaning lady had spoken to him. His expression shifted into one of mild annoyance, as if acknowledging her presence was an inconvenience. "Afternoon," he replied curtly, already glancing back at his phone. "Is there anything specific you'd like me to focus on up here?" she asked. Maintaining a steady gaze, Robert's eyebrows rose slightly, clearly taken aback. "Just keep the place clean." "All right," he muttered, dismissing her. Aaliyah held back a smile, giving a slight nod as she returned to her work. In that brief exchange, she'd seen it, the subtle superiority, the entitlement. He hadn't even bothered to make eye contact, treating her as if she were just another fixture of the office, as easily replaceable as the mop she held. But what Robert didn't realize was that she was more than a cleaning lady. She was a catalyst. The following weeks were a delicate balancing act. Aaliyah continued to work her shift on the executive floor, listening and observing as Crestwell's leadership team held meetings and strategized, oblivious to her presence. Meanwhile, Marcus provided her with confidential documents, and Lily shared information about the company's finances that revealed just how much money went to executive bonuses, often at the expense of employee benefits and raises. One evening, Aaliyah and her small group of allies met at a local diner, where they gathered in a back booth, speaking in hushed tones. The atmosphere was tense, but each of them was united by a shared determination. "I got a list of the salaries for the top-level executives," Marcus said, glancing around to make sure no one was listening. "They're astronomical." Meanwhile, People like us can barely get a cost of living increase. Lily shook her head, her eyes dark with frustration. I know people who can't afford daycare and are juggling multiple jobs. This place could do so much more. But they don't care. Aaliyah listened to them, her heart swelling with both pride and anger. These were the people who kept Crestwell running, the unsung heroes who worked tirelessly in the background, often sacrificing their own well-being. And yet, they were barely acknowledged. Things are about to change, she assured them, but we have to be smart about it. We need to show the board that they can't ignore us anymore. Over the course of the evening, they discussed strategies, deciding to compile a detailed report that would reveal the true extent of the disparities within Crestwell. Their goal was not only to confront the board but to rally other employees, creating a groundswell of support that the executives couldn't ignore. Back at work, Aaliyah's plan continued to unfold. She began to leave subtle reminders for the executives, notes with statistics about employee satisfaction, reports detailing pay disparities, and anonymous messages urging management to reevaluate the way they treated their workers. Each document was strategically placed, carefully worded to avoid suspicion but pointed enough to unsettle the executives. Robert Griffin started to notice. He'd find an envelope on his desk in the morning, labeled, "For your consideration." Inside, there would be charts illustrating the growing divide between Crestwell's highest and lowest paid employees, or graphs showing the high turnover rates among staff. The first few notes were ignored, dismissed as the work of a disgruntled employee. But as more information came to light, Robert grew increasingly concerned. He began asking his assistant to track down whoever was leaving the notes. But each attempt led to a dead end. Aaliyah's network of allies worked in silence, covering their tracks with skill and precision. The unease was spreading among the executives. Some of them began murmuring about a possible leak, a mole, within Crestwell who seemed intent on exposing them. They didn't know that the very cleaning lady they dismissed each day was the one leading the charge. One afternoon, Robert called an emergency meeting with his senior staff. Aaliyah was cleaning the hallway just outside the boardroom, moving quietly as she listened to their panicked conversation. "We need to find out who's behind this," Robert said, his voice tense. "These notes, they're not just complaints. They're facts. And if this information gets out, it could damage our reputation." James, the CFO, nodded in agreement. "I don't know how anyone's getting access to these numbers. I've tightened our data security protocols, but it's like they know exactly where to look." Richard, the head of marketing, leaned forward, his expression uneasy. "If the media catches wind of this, it'll be a PR nightmare." Aaliyah continued to mop, her expression neutral, but inside, she felt a quiet satisfaction. The men in the boardroom were finally feeling the pressure, the same pressure that lower-level employees faced every day. As she worked, she caught the eye of a young woman in an adjacent office. It was Jasmine, the intern she'd spoken to once, a woman who reminded her of herself. Jasmine gave her a subtle nod, a sign that she too was ready to join the movement. Aaliyah smiled back, her resolve strengthening. This was only the beginning. They were building something powerful, something that Crestwell's executives could no longer ignore. The wheels were turning, and Aaliyah knew that the day of reckoning was approaching. The leadership at Crestwell Industries was about to learn that power didn't just come from a corner office or a title. It came from people united in purpose. People who refused to be invisible. The tension at Crestwell Industries was growing by the day. Aaliyah watched as the cracks in the executive facade began to widen, revealing a nervous undercurrent beneath their polished appearances. Her messages were having the desired effect, and she knew she was on the brink of something powerful. But as much as Aaliyah was enjoying seeing her plan unfold, she knew that this was only the beginning. The executives were feeling the pressure, but they had yet to truly understand the gravity of the situation. They hadn't connected the dots, hadn't realized just how deeply embedded Aaliyah's influence was within the company. Today, she would make her next move. Aaliyah met with Marcus in a quiet corner of the IT floor, away from the prying eyes of the security cameras. He handed her a small flash drive, his expression a mix of excitement and anxiety. "This has everything we need," he whispered, his voice barely audible. I pulled data on employee salaries, turnover rates, and the executive expense reports. It's all there. Aaliyah nodded, giving Marcus a reassuring smile. You did great, Marcus. This is exactly what we need. As she took the flash drive, she felt a surge of pride. Marcus had risked his job to help her, putting his faith in her plan and her vision for a better workplace. It was a testament to the strength of their shared determination, their refusal to accept the status quo. With this data, she could make her case even stronger. She would prepare a presentation that would expose the financial mismanagement and the blatant inequalities within Crestwell. But she wouldn't reveal it to the board directly, not yet. Instead, she'd leverage it strategically, building support among employees and other allies. Be careful, Aaliyah, Marcus warned. If they find out what you're doing. They won't, Aaliyah assured him, her voice calm and steady. I've been invisible to them for years. I know how to move without being seen. They exchanged a brief, determined nod before parting ways. As she walked back to her janitor's closet, Aaliyah felt the weight of the flash drive in her pocket, a reminder of the power she now held. She was carrying the truth. And soon, everyone at Crestwell would see it. Over the following days, Aaliyah carefully shared information with key employees across departments. She reached out to those who had expressed frustration, those who had been overlooked for promotions, and those who had grown tired of the lack of respect they received from the executives. With each conversation, she painted a picture of a company that was driven not by the values it professed, but by greed and self-interest. People began to talk. Small groups gathered in break rooms, exchanging whispers about the company's policies, questioning the disparity between the executive bonuses and the stagnant wages of the rest of the employees. The atmosphere in the building shifted, with a palpable sense of anticipation and defiance growing stronger by the day. Aaliyah's network of allies continued to expand. She was careful not to reveal too much at once, giving just enough information to spark curiosity and conversation without exposing her identity. The executives remained unaware of the storm brewing beneath them, blinded by their own sense of superiority. One afternoon, Aaliyah caught sight of Jasmine, the intern, speaking quietly with a few other young employees near the water cooler. They seemed animated, their faces filled with a mixture of frustration and determination. Aaliyah felt a thrill of satisfaction as she realized that Jasmine had become a voice for the younger employees, rallying them around the cause without even realizing the full extent of it. Jasmine noticed Aaliyah watching and gave her a slight nod, a silent acknowledgement of the unspoken bond they shared. Aaliyah nodded back, her confidence renewed. The movement was gaining momentum, and soon, it would be impossible for the executives to ignore. Meanwhile, Robert Griffin was growing increasingly anxious. The anonymous notes continued to appear, each one more damning than the last. The financial reports he found on his desk one morning were especially troubling. They revealed discrepancies in the budget, unexplained expenses in the executive accounts, and detailed breakdowns of employee dissatisfaction. Robert had never been one to worry about the opinions of lower-level employees. In his mind, they were simply there to do their jobs, to keep the company running smoothly so that he and his team could focus on the real work. But now, he felt an unfamiliar sense of vulnerability creeping in. One evening, he called a private meeting with his closest advisors, James, the CFO, Richard, the head of marketing, and Oliver, the operations manager. They gathered in his office, each of them looking tense and uneasy. "We have a problem," Robert began, his voice clipped. "Someone in this company has access to sensitive information, and they're using it to undermine us. We need to find out who's behind this and put a stop to it." James nodded, his face pale. "I've tightened security on all financial files, but somehow, they keep getting through. It's like they know exactly where to look." Richard leaned forward, his voice laced with irritation. "Maybe it's one of those disgruntled employees we let go last quarter. You know how they get when they feel wronged." Robert shook his head. "No, this is someone on the inside. Someone with access to current information. We're dealing with a traitor." The room fell silent as the weight of his words sank in. For the first time, The men who had built Crestwell on the foundation of their arrogance and entitlement were forced to confront the reality that they were not untouchable. "We'll keep investigating," Robert said, his voice low. "But if we can't find them, we'll have to take drastic measures. I'm not about to let this company fall apart because of some disloyal employees." The executives exchanged uneasy glances, each of them acutely aware that their control was slipping. As Aaliyah continued her work behind the scenes, she began to compile a document, a manifesto of sorts, that outlined her vision for a new Crestwell Industries. It was a bold vision, one that prioritized equity, respect, and inclusivity. She outlined policies that would create opportunities for advancement, improve wages, and provide resources for employees to grow and succeed. This manifesto was her blueprint for change, her statement of intent to the board and the employees. When the time came, she would release it publicly, forcing the executives to confront the reality of their actions and the consequences of their decisions. One evening, she met with Lily and a few other trusted allies in the diner. They reviewed the document together, their expressions a mixture of awe and excitement. This is powerful," Lily whispered, her eyes shining. "It's everything we've been talking about. Everything we've wanted for years." Aaliyah smiled, feeling a deep sense of satisfaction. "It's not just words, Lily. This is our plan. This is what we're fighting for." They discussed their strategy late into the night, planning how to circulate the manifesto among employees, how to build support and make it impossible for the executives to ignore. It was risky, but Aaliyah knew that they had reached a point where silence was no longer an option. "We'll release it soon," she told them, her voice filled with conviction. "And when we do, the entire company will know the truth." The following week, Aaliyah arrived at work with a sense of purpose sharper than ever. She'd given copies of the manifesto to a handful of trusted employees, instructing them to circulate it discreetly among their colleagues. By lunchtime, whispers had spread through the building, and groups of employees could be seen huddling together, their faces filled with a mixture of shock, outrage, and inspiration. The manifesto reached Robert's desk by midday. When he read it, his face turned pale, his hands shaking with barely contained rage. This was an all-out attack on everything he'd built, a direct challenge to his authority. He called an emergency meeting, ordering all department heads to attend. As they filed into the boardroom, the tension was palpable, each executive's face etched with anxiety. They knew that this was no longer just a matter of rogue documents or anonymous notes. This was a full-blown revolution within Crestwell Industries. Outside the boardroom, Aaliyah stood quietly, mopping the floor as usual. She watched as the executives filed into the room, her heart pounding with anticipation. Today, she would finally make her presence known. As the meeting began, she put down her mop, took a deep breath, and opened the door to the boardroom. The executives turned to look at her, confusion flashing across their faces. Robert narrowed his eyes, clearly irritated by the interruption. "What do you want?" he demanded, his voice laced with impatience. Aaliyah met his gaze, her expression calm and resolute. "Actually, Mr. Griffin, I'm here for the meeting." The room fell silent as the realization began to dawn on them. Aaliyah reached into her pocket and pulled out the flash drive Marcus had given her, holding it up for all to see. "My name is Aaliyah Thompson," she said, her voice steady, "and as of this moment, I am the majority shareholder of Crestwell Industries." The executives stared at her, their faces a mixture of disbelief, anger, and fear. Robert's mouth opened, but no words came out. For the first time, he was truly speechless. Aaliyah continued, her voice unwavering. "I've spent years working my way to this moment. I've seen the way you run this company, the way you treat your employees. And I'm here to tell you that it's over. Crestwell Industries will change, and you can either be a part of that change or get out of the way." The silence that followed was profound, each executive processing the gravity of her words. Aaliyah had spent her life watching people like Robert dismiss and diminish others. But today, she was rewriting the rules. She was the one holding the power, and she would use it to build a better future for everyone at Crestwell. As she looked around the boardroom, Aaliyah knew that this was only the beginning. The tide had turned, and Crestwell Industries would never be the same. The silence in the boardroom was suffocating, the weight of Aaliyah's revelation hanging heavily in the air. Every executive's face was frozen in shock, their disbelief palpable as they struggled to process what had just happened. Aaliyah, the invisible cleaning lady they had dismissed and overlooked for years, was now the majority shareholder and de facto leader of Crestwell Industries. Robert Griffin's voice finally broke the silence. This is absurd," he stammered, his usual confidence reduced to a sputter. You can't just walk in here and..." Aaliyah raised her hand, silencing him. Her gaze was steady, commanding. "I think I just did. Mr. Griffin." He swallowed hard, his face red with fury and humiliation. Around him, the other executives exchanged nervous glances, each of them realizing that their comfortable, insulated world was beginning to crumble. Aaliyah let the moment stretch, allowing them to sit with the discomfort of knowing that everything they thought they controlled was slipping out of their grasp. "Now," she said, her voice calm but authoritative, "let's discuss the future of Crestwell Industries." Over the next few hours, Aaliyah laid out her vision for a transformed company. She spoke with clarity and conviction, presenting her manifesto, the document she and her allies had carefully crafted, as a roadmap for a new Crestwell. Her words were firm but fair, addressing each aspect of the company's policies and practices that needed change. From fair wages and improved benefits to creating a more inclusive and respectful workplace culture. "We will no longer operate on the assumption that only those at the top are worthy of respect and fair treatment," she said, looking directly at Robert. "The success of this company depends on everyone who contributes, not just the executives. From this day forward, we will treat every employee as an essential part of the team." The executives squirmed in their seats, their discomfort evident. Richard, the head of marketing, leaned forward, his face tight with resentment. "You can't expect us to turn this company upside down just because you've got a few ideas about fairness." Aaliyah met his gaze unflinchingly. "This isn't about a few ideas, Richard. This is about building a company where people actually want to work, where they feel valued and respected. You've built a culture of fear and intimidation. But that ends now. Either you're with me in making this change, or you can walk away." Her words were met with stunned silence. None of them had ever been challenged like this, especially not by someone they had deemed beneath them. After a moment, James, the CFO, cleared his throat. How exactly do you plan to implement these changes?" he asked, his voice shaking slightly. "We have budgets to consider, shareholders to answer to." Aaliyah smiled, a calm, confident smile that belied the years of planning that had gone into this moment. "I have a plan," she replied, gesturing to the flash drive in her hand. "On here is a complete financial restructuring proposal. One that prioritizes employee benefits, fair wages, and equitable opportunities for advancement. I suggest you review it. But let me be clear, these changes are not negotiable." James nodded, clearly rattled but recognizing that he had no choice but to comply. As the meeting concluded, Aaliyah turned to Robert. "Mr. Griffin," she said, her tone even, "you've been CEO of Crestwell for a long time. But the board will need to review your position in light of this new direction. Until then, I suggest you take some time to consider your future with this company." Robert's face was a mask of barely contained rage. But he knew he was cornered. With no other option, he nodded curtly, his jaw clenched as he stormed out of the boardroom. As the door closed behind him, Aaliyah allowed herself a small sigh of relief. The first battle had been won. But the war was far from over. The next few weeks were a whirlwind of activity. Aaliyah worked tirelessly, meeting with department heads, reviewing policies, and setting new standards for employee treatment. She involved employees from every level in the process, encouraging open discussions and gathering input on how to make Crestwell a better place to work. Her allies, Marcus and Lily, played crucial roles in this transformation. Marcus worked closely with the IT department to implement new security measures, ensuring transparency in company data and protecting employee privacy. Lily helped organize meetings with employees across departments, encouraging them to voice their concerns and ideas. Aaliyah's approach was revolutionary. She created an employee council, a diverse group representing different departments and levels within the company, to ensure that every voice was heard. The council met regularly, discussing policies and proposing initiatives that would benefit employees directly. Aaliyah made it clear that this was not a token gesture. The council would have real decision-making power, and their input would shape the future of Crestwell Industries. The changes were met with mixed reactions. Some employees, especially those who had suffered under the previous regime, were cautiously optimistic, while others were openly skeptical. But as the new policies began to take effect, morale improved. A pay raise and benefits package was rolled out for lower-level employees, and opportunities for professional development were introduced. A new code of conduct was established, emphasizing respect and inclusion as core values of the company. For the first time, employees felt empowered to speak up without fear of retaliation. The atmosphere in the office began to shift from one of tension and hierarchy to one of collaboration and mutual respect. While Aaliyah's allies were thrilled with the changes, not everyone shared their enthusiasm. Several executives, still reeling from the sudden shift in power, attempted to undermine her efforts. They spread rumors, sowed seeds of doubt among employees, and tried to rally support to push back against the new policies. One afternoon, Aaliyah received an anonymous email warning her that some of the board members were considering a vote of no confidence, a last-ditch effort to oust her from her position. She wasn't surprised. She knew that people who had held power for so long would not give it up easily. But Aaliyah was prepared. She had anticipated this kind of resistance and had spent weeks building her case, documenting every instance of mismanagement, every unethical decision made by the executives. She had testimonies from employees who had been mistreated, and financial records that exposed the disparity between executive bonuses and the minimal raises offered to lower-level staff. She called a board meeting, inviting every member of the board to attend. As they gathered around the conference table, she handed out copies of her report, her expression calm and unyielding. This report contains a detailed history of how Crestwell Industries has been run. She began, her voice steady. It documents the decisions made by this board, decisions that have hurt employees, eroded trust, and damaged the company's reputation. This is the legacy you've built, and it's time to decide if you want to change it. One by one, the board members reviewed the report, their faces growing increasingly somber as they read. Aaliyah had left nothing out. Every instance of financial mismanagement, every unethical practice was laid bare before them. Finally, she looked up, meeting the gaze of each board member in turn. I understand that change is difficult, especially for those who have benefited from the old ways. But Crestwell cannot survive if we continue down this path. This company belongs to its employees as much as it does to its shareholders. And if you're not willing to be part of this change, then I suggest you step down. The board members exchanged glances, a mixture of resignation and grudging respect in their eyes. They knew that Aaliyah was right. And more importantly, they knew that she had the support of the employees. Any attempt to remove her would likely result in a mass exodus of talent, a risk they couldn't afford to take. One by one, they voiced their agreement, some reluctantly, others with genuine conviction. Aaliyah had won them over, not with threats or coercion, but with the undeniable truth of what Crestwell had become and the vision of what it could be. In the months that followed, Crestwell Industries underwent a complete transformation. The company that had once thrived on hierarchy and exclusion was now a beacon of inclusivity and collaboration. Employees were no longer afraid to voice their concerns, knowing that their opinions mattered and that they were respected. Aaliyah continued to lead with integrity and vision, building a company culture that valued every individual, from the janitors to the executives. She made sure that the employee council remained an integral part of the decision-making process, ensuring that the voices of all employees were heard and represented. The media soon caught wind of Crestwell's transformation, and Aaliyah's story became an inspiration to people across the country. She was invited to speak at conferences and events, sharing her journey and her vision of a workplace where everyone could thrive. Her story became a testament to the power of resilience, determination, and the quiet strength that often goes unnoticed. And yet, through it all, Aaliyah remained grounded. She never forgot her roots. Never forgot the lessons her mother had taught her about dignity and self-worth. She knew that her success was built on the shoulders of those who had come before her. Those who had fought for a better future even when the odds were stacked against them. One evening, as she stood in her corner office overlooking the city, she thought of her mother, who had worked tirelessly to give her a better life. Aaliyah smiled, feeling a deep sense of fulfillment. She had taken on an empire, reshaped it, and turned it into a force for good. Crestwell Industries was no longer just a company. It was a movement, a symbol of hope for every worker who had ever felt unseen, undervalued, or overlooked. And as Aaliyah stood there, watching the city lights flicker in the distance, she knew that her journey was far from over. There were more battles to fight, more barriers to break, but now, she was ready for whatever lay ahead. She was Aaliyah Thompson, the woman who had changed the rules of the game. And this was only the beginning. With the winds of transformation sweeping through Crestwell Industries, Aaliyah Thompson found herself both celebrated and scrutinized. Her story had reached beyond the walls of Crestwell, inspiring workers across the nation and attracting media attention. But while many applauded her efforts, there were others who were less enthusiastic about her success. She was, after all, challenging the status quo, and not everyone was ready for such a radical shift. In the midst of this whirlwind, Aaliyah focused on making sure that her vision for Crestwell took firm root. She wasn't interested in short-lived reforms or superficial changes. She wanted a legacy that would endure long after she was gone. One afternoon, as Aaliyah was reviewing employee feedback with the newly formed Employee Council, a familiar face entered her office, Jasmine, the young intern she'd connected with early on. Jasmine had blossomed under Aaliyah's mentorship, showing a sharp mind and a keen sense for leadership. Aaliyah had recently promoted her to a junior management role, making her one of the youngest leaders in the company. "Aaliyah, there's someone here to see you," Jasmine said with a hint of hesitation. "It's Robert Griffin." Aaliyah's eyebrows rose. She hadn't spoken to Robert since he'd been removed as CEO. She nodded at Jasmine, signaling her to let him in. Moments later, Robert entered, looking a little humbled but determined. "Aaliyah," he began, clearing his throat. "Thank you for agreeing to see me." Aaliyah gestured for him to sit. Curious about his intentions, she knew that Robert had struggled to accept his demotion. But she also sensed a shift in him, a quiet understanding that he was now playing a different role in the world he'd once controlled. "I won't take up much of your time," he continued, his gaze steady. "I came to acknowledge that I was wrong about a lot of things. You've done something incredible here. And even if it took me a while to see it, I can recognize it now." Aaliyah felt a surge of unexpected respect for him. It wasn't easy for someone like Robert to admit his mistakes. She nodded, appreciating his honesty. "I didn't come here just to apologize, though," he said. "I want to help. If you'll let me. I've got experience, and I know this company inside and out. If there's any way I can contribute, well, I'd like to be part of what you're building." Aaliyah regarded him thoughtfully. There was no denying that Robert's experience could be valuable. But she also knew that allowing him back into a position of influence could be risky. However, she sensed sincerity in his offer. And perhaps, just maybe, he could serve as an example of someone who was willing to change. "All right, Robert," she said slowly, "we can give it a try. But I need you to understand that things will be different now. You'll be working with the Employee Council, with people from every level of this company. You'll answer to them, and to me." Robert nodded, a faint smile tugging at the corners of his mouth. "Understood." As Crestwell Industries continued to thrive under its new leadership model, the company's reputation soared. News outlets reported on the unprecedented shift in corporate culture, highlighting Aaliyah's focus on inclusivity, transparency, and respect. For the first time, Crestwell was a place where people wanted to work, where employees felt valued and supported. With the company's newfound success, Aaliyah decided it was time for Crestwell to go public, not just as a business, but as a movement. She partnered with other CEOs and leaders who shared her vision, founding a coalition called Workplaces for Dignity, which aimed to bring her principles to corporations across the country. The coalition quickly gained momentum. attracting support from employees and advocates for workers' rights nationwide. Together, they crafted guidelines and policies for companies that wanted to adopt similar models. Emphasizing fair wages, inclusivity, and employee well-being, Aaliyah's vision was spreading beyond Crestwell, creating ripples of change across industries. The media called her the CEO who changed corporate America. But to Aaliyah, this was about more than just the headlines. It was about honoring the legacy of people like her mother, who had worked tirelessly in thankless jobs, and creating a world where every worker, no matter their role, was treated with respect. One evening, Aaliyah found herself alone in her office, gazing out at the city skyline. The lights of the city flickered, each one a reminder of the countless people who toiled in similar circumstances to the ones she had once known. She thought of her mother, who had always told her to hold her head high and never let anyone make her feel small. Her thoughts were interrupted by a gentle knock on the door. It was Jasmine, carrying a file in one hand and a shy smile on her face. "I just wanted to say thank you," Jasmine said, her voice soft but steady. "For everything. You've changed my life, and the lives of so many people here. I never thought I'd get a chance like this." Aaliyah smiled, feeling a warmth in her chest. "You earned it, Jasmine. All I did was open the door. You were the one who walked through it." Jasmine nodded, her eyes glistening with emotion. "I hope I can make you proud." "You already have," Aaliyah replied, her voice filled with quiet pride. "Now go out there and keep making a difference." As Jasmine left, Aaliyah leaned back in her chair, feeling a deep sense of fulfillment. She knew that her journey was far from over, but in that moment, she allowed herself to feel the weight of her accomplishments. The realization that she had built something meaningful and lasting. Years passed, and Aaliyah's impact continued to grow. She became a respected voice for workers' rights, speaking at conferences and advising leaders on how to create fair and inclusive workplaces. Crestwell Industries became a model of ethical corporate governance, setting an example for companies across the country. When Aaliyah eventually retired, she left Crestwell in the capable hands of leaders she had mentored, including Jasmine and Marcus, who had risen through the ranks to become trusted executives. The Employee Council remained an integral part of the company's decision-making process, a symbol of the power and potential of collective voices. But Aaliyah's legacy went beyond Crestwell. Her coalition, Workplaces for Dignity, had grown into a national movement, influencing policy changes and inspiring a generation of workers to demand more from their employers. She had started as a cleaning lady, dismissed and overlooked by those in power. But she had risen to become a force for change, a symbol of resilience and hope. Her story became a reminder that power didn't belong solely to those at the top. It belonged to those who dared to challenge, who refused to be invisible, who believed in a better world. And so, Aaliyah Thompson's legacy lived on. In every workplace that adopted her principles, in every worker who felt empowered to speak up, and in every leader who dared to put people before profits. In the end, she had rewritten the rules, not just for herself, but for everyone who would come after her. And that, she knew, was a legacy worth leaving behind. Thank you for listening to the story. Please like and follow the channel to update the next stories.